This sounds insane, but it's true. A woman who delivered a Bigfoot baby in the middle of a thunderstorm? This isn't folklore. It's the whispered truth of a 62-year-old widow living deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Once a battlefield nurse, Miriam Walker vanished from town life after losing her only daughter during a tragic childbirth. For decades, she spoke to no one, until one spring morning, drawn by strange cries in the forest, she discovered a massive female Bigfoot writhing in labor on the mossy ground. Miriam should have run, but instinct overpowered fear. With over 300 births behind her, she knelt, stretched out her empty hands, and whispered, "I won't leave you alone." What happened next was nothing short of miraculous. 4 babies were born during the storm. One nearly strangled, one breech and breathless, the last stuck with rain flooding in. Miriam fought for every life, using only torn cloth, breath, and her trembling hands. No one else saw it, but she saved them all. Weeks passed. She returned with blankets, watched the little ones grow, until hunters came. She removed their traps, bleeding. In return, the Bigfoot family left pieces of her sweater tied to branches, their silent thank you. On the day they vanished, the smallest cub turned back, eyes glowing. She lit a candle at her window that night, whispering, "Thank you for letting me see." This is more than a strange tale. It's a story of loss, redemption, and a connection beyond species. Watch till the end. You'll never look at the forest the same way again. It was the last breath of spring in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. The early morning sky still wore its silvery veil, low clouds hanging just above the ridge like a hush not yet broken. The air smelled of wet pine and cool stone, the kind of scent that filled your lungs all the way to your spine. Rain had passed during the night, leaving beads of water clinging to the needles, bending branches just slightly until the drops slipped free and landed soft on the forest floor. Miriam Walker, 62, moved slow along the old trail, the one that curled behind her cabin like a memory. Her boots knew every root, every rock. Her hands were wrapped around a woven basket, its rim faded with time and use, stuffed with linen and old bandages, dried lavender from her windowsill. She always came out after the rain to gather, to see what the woods were willing to give. Her fingers brushed the moss like an old friend. Her eyes scanned the brush for golden seal and bloodroot. But what she found first stopped her cold. Just beneath a bent oak, half covered in leaves and old pine needles, something gleamed. A rusted brass casing, still wet with rain. She crouched, joints creaking, and picked it up. Shotgun. Old, but not forgotten. A few feet beyond, a thin length of wire looped between 2 shrubs. At first it looked like an old vine, but as she leaned closer, she saw the kinked twist of man-made metal. A trap line, the kind meant for foxes or worse. Miriam frowned, fingers brushing the snare. Moss had grown up one side, but the wire was fresh cut, slick and sharp where the end had been recently retied. Someone had been here not long ago. Her lips tightened. These hills had rules, and this wasn't one of them. Then she heard it. At first, it came soft, like a gust of air pulled the wrong way through a hollow log. Then again, lower this time, deeper, raw and strange. A sound too human to be animal, too animal to be human. A moan? No. A cry. Pain was in it. Pain and something else. She turned slowly, hand still resting on the wire, heart tapping faster in her chest. The woods had gone still. Even the birds had shut their beaks. Somewhere far off, dogs began to bark. Long, drawn-out howls cutting through the mist, followed by the crackle of men shouting. Miriam stood. Her eyes narrowed into the trees. The cry came again. She took a step forward. It wasn't courage that moved her feet. It wasn't curiosity either. It was something older, deeper, the way some women can smell fire before smoke. the way a mother knows her child's cry even in a crowd. Miriam left the wire trap behind and pushed deeper into the pines, where the path faded and the ground grew soft beneath her boots. Ferns brushed her knees, slick with dew. Spiderwebs caught the light and shimmered like threads of silver, strung from one shadow to the next. The wind changed direction. It carried something new, not just the scent of earth and wet bark, but blood, just faint, just enough to raise the fine hairs at the base of her neck. Then she saw them, not clearly at first, just movement, a shadow bending the fog, but the shape of it, the way it moved, not a deer, not a bear, tall, lurching, massive, and then it paused. Through the curtain of rain-slicked needles, she saw two eyes, wide, black, and watching. They locked on her like they'd been waiting, like they'd been following her instead of the other way around. She couldn't breathe. Not from fear, from knowing. From some trembling place in her bones that told her this wasn't a moment to scream or run. It was a moment to remember. The creature didn't growl. It didn't charge. It leaned forward slightly, one hand clutching a tree for balance, breath steaming in the chill. The sound came again, louder now. A groan, ragged and wet, pulled from deep in the belly. Its shoulders hunched, its massive body swayed. And that's when Miriam saw the second shape, smaller, slumped low in the brush, barely visible under the massive ferns. Her heart climbed into her throat. The bigger one took a half step back, then sank to one knee, gripping its side. Another cry, almost like a gasp, echoed between the trees. Miriam didn't need a second look to understand. She delivered babies in barns and storm cellars, in the backs of trucks, and once on a riverbank in '82. That sound was labor. That posture was pain. That blood on the leaves was not from any wild hunt. She whispered without realizing it. "Dear God." The creature shifted. Its long fingers clenched the tree. Its head dropped, chest heaving. Another groan, longer now, ripped through the stillness. Miriam's breath caught. She hadn't meant to make a sound, but it didn't matter. The eyes found her again. There was no malice in them, no terror, only exhaustion. And behind it, something else. Pleading, she stepped forward. Just one step, and then the dogs barked again, closer this time. A scatter of crows erupted from a nearby pine, their wings flapping like paper torn in the wind. The creature flinched. It looked past Miriam, toward the sound, then back at her, chest rising fast, one arm wrapped across its stomach. She didn't move. Neither did it. Time went thin. Then the fog shifted again. Behind the giant, deeper in the thicket, a third shape twitched, smaller still, not moving much. A low, fluttering sound, like whimpering. Miriam's pulse pounded in her ears. She was shaking now, not from fear, but from the sheer, impossible truth of what she was seeing. Her knees nearly gave. She wanted to cry, to pray, to scream, but instead, she let out a breath and dropped slowly to her knees, her old joints aching. She raised both hands, palms up, and whispered, "It's okay. I'm not here to hurt you." She wasn't sure the creature understood the words, but something changed. The muscles along its neck loosened. The frantic breath calmed slightly. It didn't look away. Not once. It sank lower, curling slightly around its middle, groaning again. Miriam saw the wet sheen of fur on its limbs, the glisten of sweat, or rain, on its broad shoulders. She watched the way it braced itself on the tree, the strain in every fiber. Then, a shift, a sudden tremor through its body that rippled to the underbrush, shaking loose pine needles. The dogs barked louder now. A man's voice rang out across the hollow. Miriam turned her head but stayed where she was. Her body was anchored. She wasn't leaving. She saw the blood in the moss now, thick, dark, soaking into the earth beneath the giant's knees. and the smaller shape behind it. A cub, a child, tucked in tight, squirming against the roots. Miriam didn't understand how it was possible, but she knew this wasn't just an animal. This wasn't madness or myth. It was birth. It was life. And it was something no one out there, none of the men with guns and dogs, would believe, much less protect. The creature locked eyes with her again, and for the briefest second, she saw it. A flicker behind the black gaze. Not fear, not instinct, but will. Conscious, deliberate will. It blinked, and then another wave hit it, forcing it down, flat palms to earth, chest straining. Miriam could almost feel the contraction in her own bones. She gritted her teeth, leaned forward slightly, hands still raised. She wasn't close enough to help. Not yet. But she would be. If it let her. The creature whimpered. A deep, vibrating sound that cracked like a tree branch under snow. The child behind it kicked. Miriam shifted onto all fours, inching closer through the ferns. The rain had begun again, light at first, tapping gently through the canopy. The wind brought the scent of steel and sweat. The dogs were closer now. She could hear one splashing through a nearby stream. But still, she didn't turn back. The creature let out a cry that tore through the trees, full of pain and fury and something older, something sacred. Miriam dropped her basket. Her hands reached the edge of the clearing. She crouched low and waited. Just one more step. That's when the giant's head bowed low, its back arched, hips straining. And then it stilled. Just for a moment. Just long enough for Miriam to see the shape crown behind it. Slick, small, trembling. She knew what was coming. The cry that followed wasn't human, wasn't animal. It was something between, something lost and ancient and powerful, echoing across the valley like the groan of the mountain itself. And Miriam, kneeling in the moss with the rain on her skin, realized something she'd never say aloud. Not to anyone. Not ever. She wasn't supposed to see this, but she had, and it would change her forever. She blinked. Her eyes burned. The creature turned its face slightly, just enough to look back, to watch the newborn behind it. Miriam's lips parted, her throat dry, hands trembling in her lap. The dog stopped barking. Everything went quiet. And in that silence, she knew she had crossed a threshold she could never return from. Something had seen her. Something had accepted her. And somewhere deep inside the forest, the wind shifted. The world held its breath. The clouds had begun to descend, low and heavy like the breath of something ancient, pushed down over the canopy as if the mountain itself was trying to hold in a secret. Miriam's boots sank slightly into the soft earth, soaked through from the earlier rain, her knees stiff as she followed the trail left in the moss. The wide, deep impressions of something too heavy, too human-shaped, to belong to any known beast. Each step took her farther from the wire traps and shotgun casings, farther from the rules of her world and into something older. The pines closed around her in silence. Even the birds had stayed quiet. The light filtering through the branches had dimmed, painted in gray-blue strokes like the last hour before a storm. The air had that charged feel, like the sky was about to crack open again. Her breath came steady, but there was a hitch in it now. The cry she'd heard hadn't faded. It had only deepened. She saw it before she understood what she was looking at. A break in the brush. A shimmer of movement behind low-hanging limbs. Something hunched, colossal, its back rising and falling with shallow, labored breath. Its fur was soaked, darkened to almost black, slicked flat across its shoulders and spine. One massive hand clawed at the ground, fingers digging into the moss like they were searching for something to hold on to. Then it shifted, and Miriam saw the bulge of the stomach, tight and distended, heaving with each breath. It wasn't hiding. It was too tired to. It didn't flee. It couldn't. It was giving birth. Miriam froze. Her whole body reacted like it was back in the war again, like she'd opened a basement door and found blood instead of supplies. But then something else rose in her, something sharper than fear, quieter than reason. Her breath caught in her throat as the creature groaned, not from rage but from pain, an ache that stretched every inch of its giant frame. She knew that sound. She'd heard it in makeshift hospital tents, in winter cabins when roads were closed and babies came too early, in women who held their own knees and begged for one more push through clenched teeth. Pain without language, struggle without help. She stepped forward, slowly, her knees creaking, her hand still raised in the open as she moved past the last curtain of branches. The giant didn't roar, didn't rise. It turned its face slightly, just enough to glance at her, and something in those eyes said plainly, "I see you, but I have no strength left to care." Its mouth opened, wide and slack, jaw trembling. Its chest spasmed once. Then it let out a groan so deep it stirred the leaves beneath Miriam's feet. The creature shifted again, its body curling in as another contraction struck. Miriam could see the muscle ripple through its core, every sinew of its torso seizing tight. The forest around them seemed to pull inward, waiting. She dropped to her knees. The moss was cold. Her jeans soaked through instantly. She lowered both hands in front of her, slow and steady, palms up. Her voice came in barely a whisper. "I won't leave you. I swear I won't." The rain started again, not hard, but steady. It fell in small splashes that dotted the creature's back, slid down its arms. The air smelled of pine, soil, and blood. Miriam saw it now, clear and red between the creature's legs, pooling slowly beneath its haunches. The birth was close, but not over. She looked around. No tools, no towels, only her own scarf, her hands, and whatever years of muscle memory still lingered in her knuckles. The creature shifted again, trembling. Its arms braced wide on the forest floor, one hand curling so tight into the dirt that it left a shallow trench. Its breath came in fast, shallow gasps. The kind she'd seen before labor turned, the kind that came when things were going wrong. She crawled closer. The giant didn't move to stop her. It didn't move at all. Its head hung low now, long strands of matted fur hiding its face. Miriam kept her voice low, steady. Just sound, no words, just rhythm. She circled around, slow as prayer, until she could see what the creature couldn't. The birth canal was fully open. She saw movement, a limb, a small hand, not clenched, but sliding out limp, coated in membrane, slipping down in slow, unstoppable gravity. A small body followed, wet and shaking, its back arched unnaturally. The head came last, not with force, but with exhaustion. Miriam caught her breath. The child, if that's what you could call it, was tiny compared to the mother, but still large by any normal standard. Its fur was short and fine, a soft ash gray, barely visible under the blood and slick that coated it. It twitched once, then curled its knees inward. The mother gave a shudder, then stilled. The baby slipped forward, slumping toward the ground, and that's when the creature rocked forward. Its balance shifted, sudden, uncontrolled. Its weight leaned hard into the slope of the forest floor. Miriam's hands shot out. She didn't think. She didn't calculate. She just moved. She grabbed the edge of a thick patch of moss and shoved it under the baby's head just as the mother collapsed forward, her arms catching herself in the dirt, just inches from crushing the child beneath her weight. Miriam's whole body shook. Her heart thundered so loud it drowned out the rain. She sat back, gasping, her hands trembling in the moss as she looked up into the creature's face. Its eyes met hers, and for a moment, there was no sound at all. Then the creature moved. Not to flee, not to attack, but to reach. Its hand, twice the size of Miriam's head, fingers thick as branches, lifted and came down slow. It didn't grab her. It didn't push her away. It rested gently on her shoulder. Not with force, not with fear, but with something that felt like acknowledgement, gratitude, maybe even trust. The weight of it made her breath hitch again. She didn't flinch. She didn't pull away. She just let it rest there, a moment, a connection. And then the hand slipped away. The baby stirred. Its limbs flailed weakly, fingers curling, eyes squeezed shut. Its breath came in small, raspy gasps, the kind that meant its lungs were new to this world. The mother leaned back, arms trembling. Miriam stepped away to give space. The creature reached down, lifted the newborn in both hands, and drew it close to her chest. She made a sound then, low, melodic, barely audible, like a hum carried through the ribs. She licked the child clean, slow and careful, then tucked it beneath her arm where the rain couldn't reach. Miriam sat back in the moss, her body cold but steady. She didn't cry. Not yet. She watched the shape of something unexplainable unfold right before her eyes. Watched the way the mother bent over her child. Watched the way the forest seemed to hold its breath with her. Then came a noise, far off, a yelp. Dogs. Another one followed, closer, and then the distant rustle of underbrush giving way beneath boots. Voices, just barely audible. Male, sharp, cutting through the silence. Miriam turned her head. The creature turned too. They both heard it. And just like that, the air was different again. Not sacred, not quiet, but hunted. The mother's body curled tighter around the baby. Her breath quickened. Her limbs tensed. Miriam looked down at the blood-soaked moss, the matted earth, the prints. So many signs. Too many. She rose to her knees, hands out again, not to threaten, but to warn. "They're coming," she whispered, not knowing if the words mattered. The creature seemed to understand anyway. She rose, heavy and slow, cradling the child tight to her chest. She took a shaky step back, then another. Her eyes didn't leave Miriam's. And for a moment, brief and weightless, they stood there, woman and giant, sharing the kind of silence no one else in the world would ever understand. Then the giant turned, vanished back into the trees, and the forest swallowed her whole. Miriam didn't move, didn't chase. She stood there, rain falling in streaks down her cheeks, her hands still half raised, breath shaking. Somewhere in the distance, the dogs barked again, but they were too late. Something holy had just happened, and it had chosen to trust her. And deep in her gut, Miriam knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The rain softened to a whisper, just a hushed tapping on the pine needles above, like the forest itself was trying to be quiet. The thunder had wandered farther up the range, leaving behind only the trembling hush of what had just passed. Miriam didn't move. She stayed knelt in the moss, arms limp at her sides, heart still pounding against her ribs like a fist that refused to rest. Her cheeks were wet, though she couldn't tell if it was rain or the tears she hadn't noticed. Across from her, the giant creature lay curled around her child, if that word even fit. One arm draped protectively, her body still heaving with the echo of labor. Steam rose faintly from their skin, not just from the heat of exertion, but from the sheer shock of new life meeting cold air. A breath, then another. Slow, labored, but steady. Miriam let her eyes fall to the newborn. It lay nestled against the curve of the mother's stomach, limbs tucked in tight, body still slick with membrane and blood. Its fur was soft and fine, almost translucent under the rain. The skin beneath shimmered in the low light, bluish in places from where circulation hadn't fully reached. One small hand twitched, the other curled. Then its chest lifted slightly. Then again. It was breathing. Alive. Fragile. A miracle wrapped in moss and shadows. Miriam's throat tightened. It hit her all at once. The stillness. The weight of what she was witnessing. She'd brought children into the world in motel bathrooms, in cornfields, in the backs of pickups, screaming women and panicked fathers and the sound of sirens too far off. She'd wiped sweat from brows and blood from legs, and had once used a shoelace when the cord wouldn't stop bleeding. But never this. Never like this. She reached into her coat pocket with hands that still trembled and pulled out the soft cloth she always kept folded there. An old cotton rag, washed so many times it smelled only of time. It was the last piece of the uniform she wore during her years as a nurse's aide. She didn't know why she still carried it. Maybe for this. She unfolded it, moved slow, kept her shoulders low and voice absent. The forest was too sacred now for words. She crept forward just enough to lay the cloth near the baby's side, not touching, just offering. Then she pulled back again, one knee at a time, like backing away from a prayer you weren't sure you had the right to finish. The mother turned her head slightly. Not a full turn, just enough. Miriam didn't blink. The creature's eyes held hers. Dark, reflective, not empty, not animal. There was thought in them. Something deliberate, something searching. Then the gaze dropped. The creature looked to the cloth. Its hand moved, huge, slow fingers brushing over the rag. It smelled it, pressed it against the child, pulled it close, wrapped it clumsily across the small back, then tucked the child beneath her chest again. Miriam felt her breath stutter. She didn't know how long they stayed like that. Maybe a minute, maybe 10. The trees didn't move. The rain barely stirred. And then it came, soft at first. A sound from deep within the mother's chest. A low vibration, not a growl, not warning, but something else. A song, a hum. No, deeper. Like the sound of wind pressed between canyon walls. It built, rose slightly, then faded. The child stirred beneath it. Its fingers flexed again, its mouth opened, then closed, its chest rose, then a cry. Small, rough, not sharp like a human baby, not piercing, but hollow, like an old whistle coated in mud. A sound pulled from the back of a throat not meant for speech, but it was a cry. Alive, real, and loud enough to shake the air. The mother didn't flinch. Miriam gasped, and the forest went still. All at once, every bird stopped. Every squirrel, every insect. The entire woods froze in some shared instinct. The cry rang out a second time, louder, stronger, and Miriam swore the trees themselves were listening. She closed her eyes. That sound. It brought something out of her she didn't know was still there. A memory, buried so deep it only came in sleep. Her daughter, Rose, that night. The fever, the pain, the final scream she couldn't stop. Miriam had held her hand, whispered every hymn she could remember, but nothing had helped. Nothing had saved her. And now, all these years later, that ache still bloomed behind her ribs whenever a child cried like that, raw and helpless and new. She reached for her scarf, not the one around her neck, the one buried deeper in her coat, the one Rose had knitted before the hospital days, before the diagnosis. She pulled it out slowly. The edges were frayed, the color faded from blue to gray, but it still held warmth, still smelled faintly of lilac and cedar. She didn't think. She just folded it and placed it near the foot of the moss bed, where the newborn's feet twitched beneath the mother's chest. The creature saw. Its eyes didn't widen. Its body didn't stiffen. It just looked and breathed and let Miriam stay. And in that stillness, something passed between them. Something old, not words, not language. Something that belonged to the forest. A truce, a recognition. A thread pulled tight between two beings who should never have met, and yet did. And stayed. Miriam sat back. Her bones ached. Her hands were raw. Her face was wet. But her heart felt full in a way it hadn't since the day she buried her daughter. Full of fear, full of awe, full of something so vast and tender it didn't have a name. The baby cried again, not as loud this time, but stronger, more certain, like it had figured out the shape of the world and was trying to claim its place in it. The sound didn't scare her. It filled her. It echoed through her chest and out into the trees like a bell rung just once, but clear enough to mark time, before and after. The rain stopped. Sunlight pushed weakly through the canopy, streaks of pale gold cutting through the mist like fingers reaching. They caught on the baby's fur, on the blood still wet in the moss, on the mother's face as she turned back to her child and lowered her head in rest. Miriam didn't move. She didn't want to break the moment, didn't want to draw attention, didn't want to wake from whatever spell the forest had cast. But something inside her said she had to remember. Every breath, every twitch, every look, because no one would believe it. No one could. And even if they did, it wouldn't matter. This wasn't for them. This wasn't for science or legend or fame. This was something sacred, private, offered like a gift, and Miriam had been allowed to witness it. She looked down at her hands, still muddy from the moss, streaked with blood that wasn't hers. Her knees were numb. Her scarf lay still by the moss bed, untouched now, but not rejected. Her old nurse's cloth was half soaked, half wrapped around the child, and she thought, maybe that's enough. Maybe this was what grace looked like, not in churches, not in books, but here, on the forest floor, in the breath of a creature the world said didn't exist, and the cry of its newborn child that echoed like truth through the bones of the trees. Then the wind shifted again. The smell changed. Smoke. No. Metal. Oil. A distant hint of something human. She tensed. The dogs weren't barking yet. The voices weren't close, but something was moving out there. The mother stirred. She rose slowly, cradling the baby to her chest, eyes scanning the trees beyond Miriam. The spell broke, but gently. The moment didn't shatter. It only bent. And as the giant took one step back, the baby curled tighter against her, let out a final cry, and then silence. Miriam didn't follow. She didn't speak. She watched as the two shadows melted into the deeper pine, swallowed by the mist and the hush and the stories that no one ever dared to believe. She was alone again, but not empty, not anymore. And though she couldn't explain why, she whispered, just loud enough for the trees to carry it. "Thank you for letting me see." And the forest, as if listening, held that whisper in its breath and let it echo. The sky had gone the color of bruised metal, heavy and unmoving, thick clouds pressing low over the blue ridge like a warning left unsaid. The pines, once murmuring gently with spring wind, stood stiff in the hush, their trunks dark with moisture and their needles still glittering with the remnants of the morning's rainfall. Somewhere deeper in the woods, a branch cracked beneath weight, sharp and sudden. But here, where Miriam sat half sunk in moss, the world felt sealed shut. The earth beneath her knees was cold, damp, but she didn't move. Not yet. She was watching, waiting. The second birth was close. The first child had been pulled into life with trembling breath and a cry that stopped birds mid-flight. Now that tiny shape lay curled against its mother's side, swaddled in old cotton, rising and falling with shallow but steady rhythm. The mother still bled. Her fur darkened and clumped along her thighs, her shoulders hunched forward in silent labor. Miriam knew that curve of the back, the way her elbows pressed into the soil, the tight way her jaws had locked. It wasn't done, not by a long shot. Another was coming, and this one was taking longer. Miriam shifted closer. She kept low, movements quiet. The scent of blood was stronger now, thick and rich in the damp air. It was a smell she knew too well, and not just from births, from losses, from war, from all the nights she'd pressed linen to wounds and prayed the body would hold. She crawled through ferns, slick with water, and slid into the clearing once more. The creature didn't turn. Her breath was ragged, teeth gritted. Her hands, huge and trembling, pressed to the earth with knuckles gone white beneath their fur. Miriam moved along the edge, skimming the side of the moss nest, eyes locked on the mother's face. Then she saw it. Another limb, crowning. But something was wrong. The baby wasn't sliding out freely. Its shoulders had wedged. The head had emerged, tilted to one side, lips bluish. And the cord. Oh God, the cord was tight, coiled once around the chest, tucked just under the arms, compressing the lungs with every push the mother gave. Miriam sucked in a sharp breath and crawled fast, heart in her throat. She dropped her scarf in the mud, ripped off her jacket sleeves, hands bare and raw, and reached for the child. The mother growled. Not loud, not a warning. A sound of pain so guttural it rattled Miriam's spine. She whispered without thinking, I know, I'm here." Her fingers worked fast. The cord was slick, knotted, tightening with every contraction. Miriam slid one finger under it, then another. She yanked it up just enough to clear the chest. The baby's limbs spasmed. A tiny leg kicked. But the face stayed still. No cry. No breath. Miriam clenched her jaw, fingers fumbling now, adrenaline making her pulse throb against her temples. She wrapped the child in her wool sweater, held it up, and started rubbing. "Come on, sweetheart, breathe." Nothing. The forest didn't move. She pressed 2 fingers to the chest and rubbed hard. Still nothing. Then, just as the air felt like it would crack from the weight of stillness, the baby jerked. One small gasp. Then another. Then a cry, short, weak, but real. Miriam laughed through a sob and held the baby close for one more second before laying it down gently next to its sibling. She covered them both with her scarf. The mother turned her head slowly, her eyes glossy with pain, but her breathing had begun to slow. She stared at the 2 children, then at Miriam. There was no sound, just breathing. Just the rain starting again, slow and steady, whispering through the trees. And then it came, a crack. Not thunder, a gunshot. Far, but not far enough. The sound sliced through the quiet like a razor, and every muscle in Miriam's body went rigid. The mother lifted her head. Her nostrils flared. Her whole body quivered as she pulled her newborns closer with her massive arms. Another sound followed. Not a shot. A voice. Shouting. Male. It echoed through the trees, bouncing from trunk to trunk like it was trying to find her. Miriam crawled to the edge of the moss bed and looked out past the tree line. Nothing but mist. But the dogs, she heard them now. Low barks, wet paws crunching through underbrush. And voices, overlapping, one angry, one confused. They were close. Too close. She turned back. The mother was on her knees now, shielding her children with her back, shoulders heaving again. Not with labor this time, but with fear. Her eyes flicked to Miriam. Not pleading, not panicked, just searching. Miriam's heart pounded. She stood, wobbly, knees wet, palms stained red. She had to choose. Call for help. Signal the men. Yell out through the trees and let them come running, guns and all, to see what she'd seen. Maybe save them, maybe not. Or stay quiet. Let the forest keep its secret. The wind shifted. Miriam took one step back. The baby cried again, this one louder, with breath and strength behind it. And that's when the lights started flashing. Not headlights, flashlights. White beams flickering across the base of the trees like spiders crawling through fog. One swept just inches from where Miriam had stood seconds before. She dropped down, heart hammering. The moss pressed cold into her chest. Her hands curled into fists. The mother didn't move. She pressed her forehead to the ground, covering the babies with her chest and arms. Miriam waited, eyes wide, ears tuned to every crunch, every shout. The voices passed, close enough to smell the tobacco on their breath. But they didn't see. Not yet, not here. She waited until the beams moved on, until the voices faded back into the valley, until the dogs stopped barking. Then slowly she stood. The mother lifted her head. Miriam knelt beside her again, chest heaving. She reached for the babies, adjusted the scarf, tucked in the edges. The smaller one was breathing better now. The color had returned to its lips. It blinked up at her with eyes so dark they looked like ink. No fear, no cry, just recognition. Miriam swallowed hard. She reached into her coat and pulled out her last square of cloth. One she'd folded and refolded so many times it had softened into almost nothing. She tucked it under the baby's head. Then she stepped back. The mother raised one hand again, slow, fingers wide. She touched Miriam's shoulder. Then her hand dropped. The wind picked up. Somewhere in the distance, a crow shrieked once, then vanished into the trees. The storm was coming back. But in this small patch of forest, in this broken cradle of moss and blood and breath, the world had paused, held still, and let something live. Miriam closed her eyes. She would never be the same. And when she opened them again, she wasn't sure if she was afraid of what might come, or already grieving what she would have to let go. The smell of wet bark and blood still clung to the air, thick and metallic, winding through the pines like a ghost that hadn't quite left. The light had grown thin, almost metallic, that dim gray of late afternoon just before a storm threatens to return. Shadows stretched long beneath the trees, stitched across the forest floor like veins. Miriam crouched in the ferns, knees deep in mud and moss, hands trembling though her breath stayed quiet. She was listening, not with her ears, but with every part of her that had survived the war, the loss, the long cold nights that taught her what danger really felt like. It was coming again. Voices. Not just distant this time. Closer. Heavy boots over roots. Cracked branches beneath the weight of bodies too loud for these woods. They weren't shouting now. They were hunting. You could hear it in the way their footsteps paused between paces, measured, calculating, just like men who'd shot first and buried later. Miriam stayed low. She'd pulled herself back from the moss bed after the second child had taken its first breath, just in time to help the third. This one came hard. Breech. Chord high. No cry at first. She'd whispered into its mouth like she used to do with calves born early, like she had once done for a neighbor's baby on a frozen kitchen floor while the generator coughed itself dead. Her breath had fogged against the newborn skin as she rubbed life into its chest. She had wrapped it in the lining of her coat, torn from the inside with trembling fingers, holding it close until a wet, wheezing cough burst from its tiny lungs like a promise. And now, that tiny shape, still limp but breathing, lay curled up beside its siblings, tucked beneath the mother's massive forearm, sheltered by the curve of her ribs. The mother was trembling. Her body had taken too much. Blood soaked the moss. Her head hung low, fur plastered to her face. Miriam didn't know if she could make it through another, but it wasn't over. The mother groaned again, so low it felt like the earth itself was straining. Miriam inched forward. She could see it already. Another swell beneath the mother's gut. A fourth. Her heart clenched. That's too many, she thought. Too late. The contractions had returned. Short, sharp, rapid. This one was coming fast and wrong. She knew the signs. She'd felt this rhythm before. A body at the edge, stretched too thin, blood too heavy, air too thick. Miriam slid closer and placed both palms on the moss, breathing through her teeth. She didn't ask permission. There wasn't time. Her hands found the wet warmth and reached forward. The child was crowning but slow. Too slow. She tilted the shoulders, fingers slick and blind. The body was stuck. The head turned wrong. The breath trapped somewhere just outside the world. The mother groaned again. Louder this time. The forest shivered. Miriam pressed her lips together, her whole body braced. She turned the shoulders slightly, felt the limbs slip free. One more push, one more breath, and the child spilled out, limp, still. Blue. No sound, no movement. Miriam's chest twisted. No, not this one. She wrapped the newborn in what was left of her undershirt and started rubbing hard. Its face was pale, mouth slack. She tipped its head, pressed her mouth to its nose. Gentle breaths, rubbing harder. Her hands red to the wrists, streaked with blood and moss and tears. Come on, come on. Her voice cracked. Don't do this. Not you. Not now. She rocked back and forth, curled over the tiny body, pressing her forehead against its crown, whispering nonsense. Old hymns, war prayers, her daughter's name. The wind moved through the trees above, rustling dry needles loose like distant footsteps. Then, just when her heart felt like it would rupture in her chest, a twitch, barely a flutter, a gurgled breath, and then a cry, small and raw, like torn fabric. Miriam let out a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, more like a sob dressed as relief. Her hands shook violently. Her whole body went limp. She cradled the baby for one more second, kissed its forehead, then placed it softly next to its siblings. All four now lay together, breathing, alive. And then came the voices again, clearer. Closer, someone cursed. Another called back. The sound of a tree branch snapping under a boot. Miriam's body jerked upright. She grabbed her coat, her scarf, tucked the bloodied cloths behind her, wiped her face with shaking fingers. She looked at the mother. The giant's eyes were wide, terrified. Her limbs curled tighter around her young. Her chest rose and fell in fast, panicked rhythm. Miriam moved quickly, scooting beside her, placing one hand flat on the creature's side. She leaned in close and whispered, "Don't move, don't make a sound." The creature stared. Miriam turned toward the sound of the hunters and waited. The lights would come soon. Then the dogs. The whole woods would split open. And if they saw this, if they saw her, if they saw them, it would all be over. But nothing came. The voices faded. The dogs barked in the opposite direction. A gust of wind had shifted everything. Miriam let out the breath she didn't know she was holding. She looked down again. The babies had quieted. Only one whimpered, still adjusting to its own lungs. And that's when it happened. The mother shifted, slow and deliberate, and reached one giant hand toward Miriam. She picked up the scarf Miriam had left, the one that still carried the warmth of her daughter's old perfume, faded from time and memory, and placed one of the newborns gently upon it. Then she pulled the scarf closer, wrapped it around her child, and pressed the bundle to her chest. She looked at Miriam with eyes that no longer held fear, only something deeper, something she couldn't name. Then she did something Miriam hadn't expected. She leaned forward and placed her massive forehead gently against Miriam's, just for a moment, just enough. It wasn't a gesture of dominance or gratitude or power. It was recognition. A pact. Miriam closed her eyes. When she opened them, the mother had pulled her children close and curled around them once again. The wind had settled. The trees were quiet. Even the birds had returned to their distant rustling. Miriam stood slowly. Her knees cracked. Her hands were numb. She backed away step by step, still facing the moss bed, not daring to turn her back. And then she heard something behind her. Not human, not the dogs, but the quiet thump of a footfall. She spun quickly, heart racing, but saw nothing, just pine trunks and shadows. She turned again. Nothing. The woods had swallowed whatever had passed, but she understood now. She was no longer alone in this. The forest had eyes, and not all of them were cruel. She knelt once more before leaving, pressed her palm into the earth, then turned toward home. Not because she wanted to leave, but because she had to. Because something inside her told her the silence had to be kept. Not as a secret, but as a vow. And somewhere behind her, a breath rose and fell, 4 little lives huddled close, and the forest held its breath again. The sky opened again just before dusk, not with thunder, but with a slow, quiet downpour that seeped into everything: earth, bark, skin, breath. The air turned colder, heavier, the kind of chill that settled not on the surface but beneath it, winding its way through bones like a warning. Rainwater spilled down the pine trunks in narrow ribbons, pooled in the shallow dips between roots, slid across moss slick with blood and birth. The forest no longer whispered. It had gone still, as if it, too, was holding its breath. Miriam's fingers were raw. Her knees ached from hours pressed into wet earth. Her back had locked sometime after the 3rd birth, but she hadn't noticed until now. Her coat hung from a branch behind her, soaked through. She'd torn off the sleeves to swaddle the 2nd baby. The rest had gone into makeshift cloths, padding for tiny bodies not made for cold rain. She didn't even feel the wet anymore. What she felt was silence. And in that silence, she knew. One more was coming. The mother hadn't moved in minutes. Her breath had slowed. Her arms wrapped tight around the 3 newborns, cradled close to her chest where her fur was thickest, warmest. But her eyes had dulled. Not closed, just dimmed. Miriam reached out, touched her shoulder, firm but gentle. The creature stirred. A flicker of pain crossed her face. Then her body trembled again, sharp and sudden. The 4th was coming. Too soon. Too fast. Miriam braced. She could see it already, just beneath the curve of the belly. Movement, swelling, then a shift. The body didn't descend like the others. It fought. Shoulders stuck. Head tucked wrong. A limb kicked outward, desperate and directionless. Miriam crawled forward, pressed her palm gently against the creature's side, whispering, "I'm here. I'm right here." The eyes met hers again, clouded now with exhaustion. Blood pooled under the mother's thighs. Not thick, not clotted. Watery. That was bad. That was the body giving up. Miriam moved fast. She pulled the last dry rag from her waistband, her old undershirt, worn to threadbare softness, and ripped it down the middle with her teeth. She knotted one end, looped it around the newborn's chest, and with her other hand, guided its shoulders. It didn't budge. The mother let out a sound, not a roar, not a scream. It was deeper than that. A shudder pulled from the bones. Miriam felt it in her own chest, vibrating through her ribs, the way she'd once felt the blast of mortars in a distant field, and known without looking that someone nearby would not survive. The child was still trapped. The rain fell harder now. It dripped from the edges of the pine needles like beads of mercury, cold and round. Miriam's hand slipped on wet fur. She tightened the grip, pulled. Nothing. She turned the shoulder again, leaned back, whispered into the wind, "Please, please don't take this one." And then it gave. The body slid free, too fast. It hit the moss with a soft thud, small limbs limp, eyes shut. Its head lolled to one side, mouth open but silent. Miriam dropped to her elbows and pressed her ear to its chest. No breath. She rolled it onto its side, patted its back. Nothing. She cradled the head and tilted it gently, opened the mouth with her thumb, and breathed. Once. Twice. Still no sound. She started rubbing the chest, fast, circular motions. Her fingers dug into the skin. She whispered again. Not words this time, just breath. The mother reached out with one hand, rested it lightly on Miriam's shoulder. It was not a push, not a plea, just presence. Miriam pressed again. The baby's limbs flinched, a toe twitched. Then at last, a gasp, short, wet, then another, then a cough, and finally, a cry. It was quieter than the others. Respire. But it was real. Miriam let her forehead fall against the child's, the tears mixing with rain as she laughed through clenched teeth. Her whole body trembled. Her hands shook violently. Her lips brushed the child's cheek as she whispered, "You made it. "You're here. You're here." Then she collapsed, not fainting, not weakness, just every muscle letting go. She sat back on her heels and stared up at the dark sky, blinking through the rain. The forest blurred. She didn't know how long she sat there. When she came back to herself, the mother had pulled the fourth baby into her arms. All four now huddled close. One of them suckled clumsily at her chest. The others twitched in half-sleep. The rain had soaked the moss into a deep, muddy bed, but they didn't move. They just breathed. Miriam tried to stand. Her legs gave once. She steadied herself on the tree trunk behind her, palms scraped raw. Her eyes scanned the woods. Still quiet, but not safe. She knew that quiet. It meant something was listening, or stalking, or both. She gathered the rags, the bloodied scraps, her coat, what was left of it. She tucked everything into her pack, hands still shaking. She looked down one more time. The mother was watching her. Not afraid, not even cautious, just watching. Miriam knelt again. She pressed her hand to the creatures. Their fingers didn't match in shape or size, but something in the warmth, the weight, the stillness, it spoke, and neither of them turned away. The rain began to slow. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called out. It was the first natural sound she'd heard in hours. She rose slowly, turned toward the trees, took one step, then another. She didn't look back, but she felt it, the breath of the forest behind her. The pact sealed not in words, not in blood, but in something older, something sacred. And as she reached the edge of the clearing, the wind picked up again, cool and sharp. She tightened the strap on her pack and whispered to the shadows, "Stay hidden, stay alive," and kept walking. By the time the rains faded and the forest dried, the summer had crept in without apology. It didn't announce itself with bloom or fanfare, just warm air that clung to the skin, longer hours of sun that made the pines glow gold in the evening, and a stillness in the wind that made even the deer walk slower. The mountains wore green like armor, thick and proud, hiding everything they chose to keep. Miriam knew better than to trust the ease of the season. Things didn't stay calm for long in these woods, not when secrets were growing among the roots. She went back, not just once, not even just once a week. It became part of her, the same way she fed the birds or boiled herbs for the neighbors. She didn't tell anyone. Not that there was anyone left to tell. The path behind her house, the old game trail that curved near the stream and dipped behind the boulders where the ferns grew thick, that became hers again. But not just hers. There were signs now. Changes. Moss patches tamped down. Stones shifted from their usual places. Once, she found a pile of bark stacked neatly beside a hollowed log. Not chewed or shredded, stacked. Another time, she found her old scarf, the one she'd wrapped around the third baby, tied in a loose knot around a low-hanging cedar branch. No wind could have done that. And then there was the wool. It started with a thread. Faded gray, caught on a splintered stump like it had been brushed by something moving fast. She recognized the texture. It was from the sleeve of her coat, the one she'd torn during the births. A few days later, she found more, tied in small tufts to saplings, draped across vines, not left haphazardly, marked. They weren't for her at first, but she learned to read them. The pattern, the trail. She followed one line through the woods and found herself at the edge of a clearing she hadn't seen before, wide, ringed with stones. At the center, paw prints, massive, deeper than her boot would ever press, and smaller ones clustered close beside them. She knelt down, traced one of the smaller prints with her fingers. It barely spanned her palm. The moss had begun to grow back over the center, but the shape was still perfect. Toes, heel, weight. They were growing. The next time she saw them was just after dawn. The light still blue and soft, like the world hadn't quite decided to wake up. She stood behind a rock outcrop, breath held, heart racing. They were only 30 yards away, maybe less. The mother moved slow, deliberate, scanning the trees as she walked. 3 of the young followed, bumbling but steady, one pausing every few steps to chase a falling leaf. The 4th, the smallest, the one that nearly didn't make it, lagged behind, always testing, climbing halfway up a trunk, then tumbling down. Miriam smiled. She didn't call out. She didn't move. She just watched. Let the wind carry her breath somewhere else. Let her heartbeat sink into the rhythm of the forest. She started leaving things. Not food, not tools, just pieces, intentions. A small mirror with the backing peeled off, left on a rock to catch the sun. A carved cedar heart she'd made years ago and forgotten at the back of a drawer. The red ribbon she'd once tied around a basket for her daughter's birthday. Each item she placed along the marked trail, carefully, respectfully, never too close. And sometimes they disappeared. Other times they were returned, altered. The mirror came back with scratches etched in a spiral. The ribbon had been woven into pine needles and hung from a high branch, fluttering like it had been hung with pride. But summer wasn't just gentle. Things crept back in. First, it was the smell. Metallic, oily, unnatural. Then came the baits. Cans of tuna sliced open, nailed to trees, a strip of deer hide tied to a rope, dangling low and reeking. She knew those tricks. She'd seen them before. Not local boys hunting for dinner. These were traps, staged, not meant for food, meant for capture, meant for curiosity, the kind that brought danger. She followed the scent one evening and found a new trap just beyond the rise. A massive steel jaw, rusted at the hinge but sharpened at the teeth, its jaws pried open with twigs, waiting. Beside it, a boot print. Heavy, not hers. Fresh. She crouched and stared at the metal, her fists clenched so tight her knuckles went white. That night, she brought gloves, a crowbar, and a canvas bag. She didn't sleep. She moved through the woods like a ghost, silencing the forest one trap at a time. Every spring-loaded snare, every hidden pit, every wire strung knee-high across game trails. She found them, dismantled them, sometimes buried them, sometimes broke them in half. Her hands bled, her arms ached. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. This place, these creatures, they trusted her, and she was not going to let that be broken. One morning, as she pulled a rusted snare from a hollow log, she looked up and froze. Across the clearing, just on the edge of shadow, stood the smallest child, alone. Watching her, it didn't move. Neither did she. The sun caught the curve of its cheek, the shimmer of water on its fur from the mist. In its hand, a strip of fabric, one of the wool ties she'd left weeks before. It held it up slowly, like an offering, then turned and vanished into the trees. Miriam stood for a long time after that, hand pressed to her chest, the air shaking in her lungs. That night the dogs returned, far off at first, then closer, low howls turning to sharp barks, the kind that travel in a pack. She could hear the men, too, their calls, their whistles, the crunch of boots moving faster than before. They weren't lost anymore. They were tracking. She slipped out the back door before dawn, didn't bother with breakfast. Her boots were already muddy. The axe stayed by the door. She didn't take it. Just her canvas bag and a small pouch of dried berries she'd gathered for herself. As she stepped into the trail, she saw it. A new mark, one she hadn't made. A strip of her old coat, tied in a knot she hadn't done. But she understood it. A signal, a warning, and with it came a cold weight in her chest. Summer wouldn't last forever. The real danger hadn't arrived yet, but it was coming. She could feel it in the stillness, in the way the birds had stopped singing that morning, in the smell of gasoline that lingered longer than it should have, in the fact that for the first time in weeks, the youngest child hadn't appeared at all. And as she reached the bend where the trail dipped into the ravine, she knelt beside a tree and ran her hand across the bark. New scratches, deep, vertical, Not from claws, from steel, cut recently. And beside it, a footprint, a man's, heavy, deliberate, facing the wrong direction, facing deeper into the woods, toward the circle, toward the den. Miriam stood, eyes narrowed, hands trembling but not with fear, with rage. She pulled her scarf tight around her neck, took a breath so deep it burned, and stepped back into the green, not to watch this time, but to protect. The leaves had turned overnight. One morning, Miriam stepped out onto the porch and found the world dipped in amber, rust, and crimson. Every tree blazing like it had caught fire from the inside out. The air was cooler now, thinner, like something was pulling back from the land. The scent of pine still lingered, but it was layered beneath dry leaves, wood smoke, and the faint sourness of rain that never quite came. Everything had slowed. Even the birds didn't sing with the same recklessness. The forest had gone quiet, not in fear this time, but in farewell. And she knew, even before she stepped off the porch and into the trees, that they were leaving. Her steps were slower these days, not just from age. There was a weight in her chest, something like grief, but not quite. It hadn't happened yet, but it would. She could feel it. The markers were still there. Strips of her old coat tied high in the branches. A ring of small stones rearranged into a spiral near the cedar grove. She'd learned to read their language, these silent signs left behind like breadcrumbs. But this time, they pointed toward something final. She found them in the birch clearing. The light had shifted by then, low and golden, the way it gets before dusk in October when shadows stretch long and everything feels like a memory before it's even gone. The mother stood at the edge of the grove, her back to the wind, one arm stretched wide to gather her children close. They were bigger now, no longer tiny bundles of fur and breath. They moved with weight, confidence, but they still stayed close to her side, all except the smallest one. That one lingered behind. The child stood at the base of a tree, staring up at its leaves, one hand holding something Miriam couldn't see from where she stood. Its shoulders were hunched, legs bent awkwardly in hesitation. Miriam didn't move. The forest held still with her, breath caught between seasons. The mother turned her head slowly, her massive frame silhouetted against the light filtering through the trees. She looked older, not weaker, just worn. Her eyes met Miriam's. No fear, no surprise, just recognition. Then she turned back to her children, one by one. She touched their foreheads to hers. The smallest whimpered when it was his turn, his fingers still wrapped tight around the object in his hand. He pressed his brow to hers, then turned away, burying his face into her chest. She knelt, wrapping all four of them in her arms, holding them in silence for what felt like a long, long time. Miriam felt the tears come before she realized she was crying. She stepped forward, slowly, out of the shadows and into the edge of the grove. Her boots crunched leaves, and that was all it took. The youngest turned. He saw her. The others stayed huddled against their mother, but the little one took a step forward, then another. His arms hung loose at his sides. Something dangled from his fingers. Fabric. A scrap of old gray wool, frayed at the edges. It was hers. He took one more step, stopped, and looked back. The others hadn't moved. The mother watched. So did Miriam. He turned back to her, lifted the fabric, held it up in one hand, eyes wide and bright, with something too deep to name. Then slowly, he lifted his free hand and waved. Not big, not silly, just a small flick of the fingers. Then the sound came. Dogs, somewhere downhill, barking, close. Miriam snapped her head toward the ridge. The wind had shifted again, carried the noise with it. The child flinched, dropped the fabric, and turned toward the others. The mother stood. Her muscles tensed. She scooped the smallest one into her arms and barked, a deep, guttural sound that made the trees vibrate. Miriam didn't think. She reached into her bag and pulled out her canteen. heavy aluminum, dented from years of drops and scrapes. She twisted the cap and threw it hard, deep into the woods in the opposite direction. It landed with a hollow clang, bounced once, and rolled down the slope. The sound echoed loud and sharp. The dogs stopped, then turned. Their barks shifted, moved away. She waited until she couldn't hear them anymore, then turned back. The grove was empty, gone. Not a trace, not a breath. She stood for a long time, staring into the stillness. Then she saw it, on the ground near where the child had stood. The fabric. But not just that. Wrapped around it, woven through the threads, was a length of cedar bark, peeled thin, tied in a knot. Their knot. Their way of saying something had been understood. She knelt, picked it up, and pressed it to her chest. The wind moved through the grove again. The leaves danced, and something in the trees let go. Later, when she returned home, the sky had darkened. She lit the lantern in her window, just like she always did. Not because she thought they'd see it, but because it felt wrong not to. She sat in her chair by the fire, boots still muddy, hands still shaking. She didn't cry again, not then. Instead, she whispered something into the room, not for the walls, not for herself, but for whatever might still be listening. "Thank you," she said, "for letting me be part of it." And in that small house, tucked deep in the woods of Blue Ridge, a light stayed burning long into the night. Not as a beacon, but as a promise. Some stories don't end with answers. They linger like fog in the pines, or the echo of a cry just before dawn. Soft, almost forgotten, but never fully gone. What we've shared here is not just a tale of the wild, not just whispers between trees or shadows slipping through the undergrowth. It's about something deeper, the fragile thread that binds all living things when no one's watching. The quiet, unwavering truth that compassion doesn't ask for proof, and love doesn't always need a name. Sometimes the most powerful moments in life are the ones no one else sees. A hand offered in silence. A breath fought for and finally found. A choice made when no one would know but your own conscience. These are the sacred acts. Uncelebrated, unwitnessed, but no less real. We like to think the world runs on loud declarations, on facts and explanations. But if you've listened this far, you know better. You know that what really shapes a soul, what truly carves the heart, are the things done gently, in secret, with no reward beyond the quiet, knowing that you did not look away. And maybe that's the point. That no matter how lost we feel, or how far gone something seems, there's always a thread, thin and trembling, pulling us back to mercy. That even in the most unexpected places, even in the loneliest corners of the world, something can reach across the divide and say, "I see you, I trust you." And if we have the courage to stay still, to stay kind, something beautiful might survive. Not everything sacred needs to be explained. Some things are meant to be felt, to be protected, to be remembered. Not because we need proof, but because they remind us who we are when no one's watching. And maybe, just maybe, that's what it means to be truly human. If this story moved something in you, if it made you pause, made you wonder, made you feel even for a moment that there's more to this world than what we see, then we invite you to leave a piece of your heart with us. Share your thoughts below. Tell us what stayed with you. And if you believe these stories matter, these quiet, haunting glimpses into what might be, consider subscribing to the channel. It's how we keep the fire lit. Thank you for walking this path with us. We'll be here waiting, where the forest listens.